Well, I haven't been right most of the time. Being a Denver Broncos fan kind of limits your horizon to. Can They said this thing isn't working? Can you hear out there? All of you who can't hear, raise your hands. Now, what am I supposed to do? Talk there. How's that? Okay, yeah, I learned that from Floyd years ago. Well, I'm very impressed at how many people are at this conference. And if you stop and think about it, it's great that all of you are working in this field. But if I figure you're probably working with 20 to 30 clients each, and that's a measure of the violence going on in Indian country, that's pretty depressing. So, trying to address a audience with so many professionals and people working at the grassroots level is a pretty difficult thing. So let me start out with a story and maybe comment on it. The end of the 1970s, in between all of the nonsense that goes on at Pine Ridge, uh, my friend Gerald Onefeather was named head of police for a 2-year term. What he did was call the officers together and he said, "You're not going to be policemen here, you're going to be peacemakers. And before you put people through all of the institutional activities, responsibilities, and eventually penalties, why don't you get the relatives of people who are misbehaving and address the relatives as well as the wrongdoers? So if you have two people drunk and beating each other up on Saturday night, then Monday morning you get the families together with the two people who misbehave. And then you have them straighten things out between the families. And now this didn't sit well with the Bureau, and it didn't sit well with, I think it was Department of Justice at that time. But Gerald forced the officers to do that. Now, in a 2-year period, the crime statistics on Pine Ridge fell something tremendous. And so he was looking forward to getting a renewal of his appointment as police chief and the program he'd started. And what happened, of course, is the people in Washington looked at the statistics and said, crime's down at Pine Ridge, we can cut their grant. So you had, for one brief period, and believe me, you know, a 2-year period of peace at Pine Ridge is equivalent to 500 years of peace someplace else. But one brief period, you had a traditional functioning police force there. Now, from that, I have to ask myself the question of how statistics could turn that fast in favor of a better social climate at Pine Ridge. And what I have to say is that he reached far back into the traditions and took some of the ideas that had been practiced before reservation days. And once he oriented just one part of that community to that kind of change, then you had beneficial effects all over. So how do we go back to the traditions? And what I see, looking at programs on various Indian reservations, plus the requirements of the '68 Civil Rights Act, is that we're being asked to import institutions and procedures that are wholly foreign to Indian communities and are not working in white communities either. And so when I look at it from that perspective, then I have to say that how you would enhance the positive work you're doing and how you would begin to bring violence under control is to really fight for the concept of community in those reservation communities. And that is to involve all age groups in the decisions made with regard to wrongdoing, sexual misbehavior, etc. Now we have to get people to stand up in the communities and say this is not the way to do it and this is wrong. And I think if you start people and begin to build core groups in each community, it says we're not going to put up with this, this is the wrong thing to do, and we've got higher standards than that. Now I recognize what I'm telling you is the most difficult part of dealing with things. When I was at NCAI, at one point we had to vote on whether to accept the omnibus bill, which was bad legislation. And a group of us opposed it. The other tribes voted for it, even though they didn't like it, because they said they didn't want to get in trouble with anybody or have any hard feelings. And so you've got that barrier at the community level, at the tribal level, on up through the federal level. And you can't run away from the responsibilities to call out whether you believe something's right or wrong. And to pretend that we're going to let things go by because we don't want friction is simply to increase the possibility of having more victims. Now, where do we start with this? And unfortunately, I think we have to start with the movement toward traditional religion. And if you look at what's been happening, there's severe appropriation of traditional religious practices, many times by Indians not really centered in the communal life of a reservation, and many other times by wholly bogus medicine men. Now, I must get at least one letter or phone call a week, primarily from people in the eastern United States who say so-and-so came through here claiming he was a pipe carrier or staff carrier or wampum carrier or Swit Lodge doctor or peyote roadman. He did these ceremonies for us, and we discovered he was exploiting some of the young women, etc. And over again, I asked them to check people's credentials, to get on the telephone and call the elders at different reservations, say, what about this guy? And yet there's this reticence, even then, to go check out people's credentials. And so I think we have to start there. If we don't have traditional religion as a basis, exactly what is going to be the core value that we're going to have to build communities and stop the violence? And I, from time to time, deal with Arval Looking Horse, and we try and point out various people masquerading as medicine men. But even with Arval's name on it, it doesn't do much good a lot of times. So when you look at the larger society, and these people are hungering for some kind of spiritual experience, not just a belief, but to go through a ceremony in which there are different experiences than people have had before. And I think that's the situation we find ourselves in. So it's to even start talking about reform in the area of violence and the creation of victims is going to involve considerable agony within the Indian community of laying down some laws and demanding that something be done. Now, it's very difficult for me to talk to this generation of people because when I grew up in South Dakota, each reservation seemed to be dominated by one or two older women who could read the riot act to their relatives and their near relatives in the other parts of the community, and they kept things pretty much in check. Now, since then, we've seen that function of the older women more or less fade away. So I think in terms of reform, we ought to look seriously at establishing certain prestigious positions within the tribal community, and one of which would be an elderly woman being the head of the clan or kinship system in the tribe. And they should have the power to intervene as a moral presence in whatever is happening in tribal institutional life. I spent some days up with the Six Nations in the early 70s and was invited to one of their governing meetings. And they have a very sophisticated way with 3 different kinds of chiefs discussing things back and forth. And I asked him, I said, gee, if we had this out in Sioux country, it'd be a lot better than everybody standing up and claiming to be a descendant of a treaty signer, because almost the whole tribe descended from one treaty signer or another now. But I said, how do you reach all these decisions without any input from the women? And Orrin Lyons says, well, if you look in the back of the room, there's all these old ladies sitting back there. So when the 5 head chiefs make a decision, you notice they're pretty hesitant to announce their decision. They're looking to see if the old ladies go like this, they're not going to do it. And if they go like that, then it's all right to pass it. And I thought, gee, that's a clever way of doing things. Well, within about a 3-month period, I had that verified for me. Down at San Carlos, Marvin Mull, I don't know if any of you are from San Carlos, that goes way back in your history. Marvin Mull invited me down to talk on legislation. And there was a public health official there. He was going to talk to the tribal council. And it seemed that the IHS man was there complaining because in one of the new houses that had been built for the people, it was pretty close to the reservation line, and they had run a water line out to this house, and this old woman owned the house. Well, she got her grandson, and he hooked onto the water line and ran a pipe off the reservation. So the old lady was selling San Carlos water off the reservation and making a pretty good living at it. So the IHS guy was there to get the tribal council to pass a resolution taking away what the woman was doing. Marvin knew what was coming up, and just as the meeting started, in came 4 old ladies and sat in the back of the room with their heads down. And I could just imagine what they were plotting. And so Marvin asked me to go first. And so I talked about legislation for a bit, and the IHS guy's getting very nervous. And I thought I was done. And Marvin says, he looked at those old ladies, and they wouldn't look at him. He said, why don't you tell us about the Allotment Act? And I thought, what the hell is this? That's been dead for 35 years. And all of a sudden, I had the most inquisitive tribal council I've ever talked to. And I told them all about the Allotment Act, and various members of the tribal council would ask questions. I mean, sometimes the questions were god-awful obscure. We finally finished up with the Allotment Act. I'm just ready to go and smiled at Marvin. He said, I want you to tell us about the removal policy. And I said, well, you can imagine, 9 to 12:30 of talking. And so Marvin at 12:30 told the IHS man, well, I guess you'll have to come back next month. In which the 4 ladies' heads simultaneously go up in the back. And Marvin took me to the San Carlos store and gave me a free black hat, a cowboy hat. And he says, thank you for doing that for me. Now, I never did hear the end of it, but let me put it to you. that in the old traditional manner, you would have let the old lady go ahead and sell that water, because that was a way of subsidizing a better life for her. And to have a foreign institution come in and say, no, you can't do this. I mean, it's not like she was selling the whole Roosevelt Reservoir or anything. She was doing this occasionally just to earn a little pin money, you see. But in the old days, you would have let something like that go. I would have concentrated rather on why the BIA was not putting wells and water lines all over San Carlos, and why it was just this one little thing. So what does that mean for your practical life? It means a lot of times you've got to suck it up and say, no, we're not going to do this. So this may be the law, but this is not the way to apply it. Now, when Civil Rights Act of '68 first came out, and I was part of the group that got that passed, and we had one hell of a time. What I visualized, and I tried to talk to tribal judges early in the game, what I visualized is the tribal court could become a vehicle for going back to traditional ways. One, it could invoke more severe penalties than what the average penalty is for certain kinds of violations. But two, if tribal court opinions were required to articulate traditional law of the community in addition to the Anglo law that's being applied, you would quickly build up a reservoir of knowledge among a lot of people as to how traditionally you would handle things. Once people began to understand that, you could then transfer some of these transgressions into an elders or community forum in which a change of behavior is required and not the sentencing and jail time, etc. Now, people write there are a number of people written articles on this and suggesting that the Indian way of restitution and compensation is a lot better than the Anglo way of punishment. But we haven't had the people very aggressive about making this kind of change. And so what I'd advocate that you do is, one, have strong advocates in the community to say what's right or wrong. But two, put intense pressure on the elders and the courts to begin to explain the decision reached by that court in Anglo terms and in traditional tribal terms. And you will find that some of the punishments are very innovative. Sometimes you're not talking about punishment at all. You're talking about simply healing a breach of misunderstanding. And so what I'm suggesting to you is that a lot of pressure can be brought on the institutions you have now to reorient them in a different way. My biggest fear always in tribal courts is it'll just become another Anglo model. And I want you to remember one thing. Anglo society is filled with pathological liars. See? And I can prove it. And you go to court and you're a witness, what's the first thing they say? Put your hand on the Bible and swear that you'll tell the truth. Now, what does that say about society? That on every other instance, except this formal instance, we expect you to be a liar, because we all are. So telling the truth becomes a ceremonial act in the Anglo. It's as close as you can get to a conversion. And if you look at what we've been through this year politically, you say Vine is 100% right there, huh? Now you want to think about those differences, because they're great differences. So you want to think, what is compensation or restitution? How do we set up credentials for medicine people? See, one or two people in a community saying, hey, this is not right. We've got to give people the assurance if they speak up, something's going to happen. Now, that's not always true, so don't get discouraged. I turned down an honorary degree from CU because I thought they should have spoken to the needs of 3 women who'd been raped by football players. But it's very sad that I couldn't find anybody on the CU campus that would speak up also. And no one on the Board of Regents. See? And no one in the governor's office. And no one in the newspapers. So you don't always win in spite of her great introduction. Sometimes you really get your head handed to you. But that's okay, because you've set down a goalpost there and said, I want some of you people to think about crossing this someday. I think the best thing you can do is stick your head out, and even if you lose, tell the people around you who knew what you were trying to do to support you or to support the next person who speaks out. You've got to slug it out. And in institutions, not only have they done wrong, but they always try and cover up their wrongs. If you want to trace the roots of racism, you go right back to the university system. That's where it comes from. Most American citizens hardly know how to tie their shoes, let alone anything else. So they get these racist ideas primarily from educational institutions. The final thing that I might tell you is that you are in much better shape than the rest of society, because it's not just the government that's failing, all the institutions are eroding. And wherever you look, nonprofits, volunteer groups and everything, they're just fading away now. The influence that some of these groups had when I was young in the 60s, they're not even coming in the door anymore. And so you've got a perfect opportunity to build new institutions now, but they have to be built and they have to be new. And they have to be something that people want to attach themselves to. And there are any number of devices you can use to start out. And I've advocated, and particularly I've tried to get this going in Minnesota. When I've gone up there, I've hammered at these people. Project the idea in your community that you would like a night set aside, maybe every 2 weeks, twice a month, maybe once a month, although I think that's not it, maybe once a week, where you have an open house. You get the elders to tell about their lives. They don't have to tell about Indians in the Stone Age or the Ice Age or anything, but tell about their lives. And invite middle-aged people and have plenty of children there. And just make this a social event of talking about what's happened in the last century to your community. And if you persistently dedicate yourself to that, people will begin to be attracted to it. They'll understand that we're part of a historical train, and we do represent a nation that was here hundreds of thousands of years ago, and we hope, and we're trying to build, that it'll be here 100,000 years from now. So start that little thing. You can have Kool-Aid and cookies afterward. You can let the elders talk about anything they want. But in doing this, you elevate the elders to a status. And you get the elders interested in talking about what has happened in their lifetime, and then what their parents told them or what their grandparents told them. I was up at Little Traverse about 2 weeks ago, and they asked me to make recommendations. They're one of the most progressive tribes I've ever seen. They've got elder housing, they've got a hotel, they've got social services. They're just about taking care of all of their tribal members. They got 1,700 tribal members. Fantastic thing. Well, I started to advocate the elder stuff, and I said, I do weird things, and I'm working with some young people who are helping me track down whether there were sea serpents in the lakes around here. Now that really got everybody, wow. As a result of that, some of the old ladies, after I finished speaking, they said, well, my grandfather told me about those things, and he told me what lake they're in and everything, and I'm going to push that we can have another meeting and just go over some of these things. And I thought, thank God, if you get one person interested. And then she looks forward to 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to get all of our friends who know about this. And then once you get them there in a meeting, exchanging ideas, there's no subject that they won't want to cover. And you've got your movement underway. I, of course, will know about the sea serpents long before any of you. So, but those are my suggestions. He stole my pack of cigarettes here. Oh. Those are my suggestions to move things. Let me tell you, I've lost maybe 7 out of 8 fights, but I've always come back up off the ground and get back into it. And after you've done that for a while, you begin to see how these things can change. I rely very heavily on friends, old friends, and new acquaintances who want to make changes also. And a lot of times I learn from them rather than teach them. And so let me advocate that you individually form alliances with friends you can trust. In the Marines, we used to say, I'll hit the beach with that guy, or I wouldn't hit the beach with that guy. People who help you politically, personally, spiritually. And cling to that group. And when you see younger people coming along, bring them into some of those. If I know anything, it's because when I was in NCAI, I had a generation of Indian tribal chairmen in those tribes who'd started out with John Collier and they'd worked their way through. And there wasn't anything that those people didn't know. And I picked up all kinds of information, techniques, etc. So I'll close by telling you one of my favorite techniques. In 1968, we were fighting the omnibus bill. And as I said before, it looked like some of these tribes were going to vote to accept the omnibus bill. Now, the problem was that Section 4 allowed the BIA to mortgage tribal lands to raise money for a project. And when the project failed, the tribal lands were lost. There was no penalty to the BIA, which is a hell of a mess. Well, we fought all afternoon, and finally the wimps called for a vote. And I thought, oh my God, we're going to lose this. And so I started to fall into depression. Well, Cato Valander, chairman of Rosebud, is sitting next to me, and he starts putting away his papers in his briefcase, takes out his cigarette, crimps it the way Cato used to do, lights it up. In those days, we lived in a civilized society. You could light a cigarette indoors. And I said, Cato, we're going to lose this. No, son, he says, we're not going to lose it. So there, is everybody ready to vote? Roger Jourdain's the chairman. Is everybody ready to vote? And Cato says, point of order, Mr. Chairman. Roger says, all right, what is it? And he says, do we vote by tribes or individuals? Well, you can imagine, huh? The Indians who didn't represent tribes, weren't an official delegation. We've been here 3 days, we need to vote. The tribes have brought their whole tribal council in. Well, we got 12 votes. And then a guy from Oklahoma stands up. There are 37 tribes in Oklahoma. I get 37 votes. So Cato and I walked out of the meeting down to the Roger Smith. I was into 3 drinks by the time these guys have finished fighting and showed up at the Roger Smith. And I said, how did you know that? And he says, son, white men will fight over something. Indians will fight over anything. So reform that part of our life, huh?
Vine, on behalf of the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, the Office of Victims of Crime, and other co-sponsors, we'd like to present you with this gift.
Cigars.
Yeah. Many
You
of the
smoked them all.
That's right. Me and the kids smoked them all. Many of the rights that tribal people have had recognized in the past 40 years flow from your work. You've been a tireless advocate for tribal people. You're a creative inspiration for litigators, for tribal people, for policymakers. You're doing tremendous research and scholarship now. You're a resource for people who are litigating tribal rights. You've been a tremendous friend to my family and to our community. You've taken the long view and you recognize the past, present, and future. We would like to thank you for being a tremendous resource, for being fearless, for being a strategist, and for being an honorable person. Thank you.
Can I respond to that? Now, these people have got me all wrong. It pays to be stupid, and I'm stupid, so I keep asking questions trying to find out what's going on. In the process, I have all kinds of people tell me lies, and I say, no, 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 I don't want that. That's all. So the stupider you are, the more questions you ask, the better fun you'll have.